Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Wednesday, October 10th, 2018 day, also known as National Bring Your Teddy Bear to Work Day. I am so excited that you have decided to join us today. I'm looking around our studio and see no teddy bears within eyesight, and I'm wondering to myself, apparently people are not heeding the National Day, but nevertheless, I hope if you're not heeding the National Day, you're making most of the day that you've been given. So grateful that you decided to join us today. We've got a great show for you coming up today. We'll be talking a little bit during this first hour about Hurricane Michael as it continues to grow closer, draws closer to the Florida Panhandle, where we've got some new reports out of Florida. We'll be able sharing with you all as well, and then also this understanding. Like, one of the things that I often think about when I hear about some of these hurricanes is just the number of individuals that don't evacuate, and I always just think to myself, well, why in the world would you not evacuate? But that's really it's a loaded question that has a complicated answer, primarily because for many of us, kind of evacuations are just considered requisites, but in reality, they're really luxuries. And so we're going to look at some of the research indicating why individuals don't evacuate. And so we'll look at that. We'll also talk a little bit about the surprise news yesterday out of Washington that the UN ambassador, Nikki Haley for the U.S., has decided to resign at the end of the year after 2 years in this position, but also 6 years prior serving as the governor of South Carolina. Whether the implications for that, kind of the makings of her legacy, we'll kind of overview that a little bit. We'll also be talking about family life. There was some new interesting research out that came out yesterday that indicated that parents are only getting around 30 minutes every day for me time, is what they're calling it. And so what are the implications with that as well as in the second hour, we'll be talking to everyone from Will Dowell will be here. He leads a nonprofit organization called Behind Every Door. He'll be sharing with us some of the work his organization is doing, as well as the needs that are being met, as well as we'll be talking with Senator Ted Cruz, as well as Representative Pete Sessions will join us over the phone. Be talking to them a little bit about their race. As now we're drawing closer. We're less than a month away from the elections. We're past the registration deadline, but what many saw is that there was a huge registration bump when Taylor Swift came out and supported Marsha Blackburn, or not, rather did not support Marsha Blackburn, but Phil Bredesen for the Senate seat in Tennessee. And so that saw a huge spike in registration numbers. But now we're coming to the point where individuals will soon cast their early ballots, and then we are less than a month away from those. And so we'll be talking with Senator Ted Cruz as well as Representative Pete Sessions. But nevertheless, I wanted to let's go ahead and lead off the story as well. Hurricane Michael continues to loom down, continues to just loom on the horizon, rather. It's beating down on the panhandle of Florida, and reports indicate that wind speeds are now up to 150 miles an hour. I noticed a video that was posted on Twitter right before we went on air of showing this new construction that was right on the beach in Panama City had just collapsed into the ocean. What's fascinating is a state of emergency has now been declared in 108 Georgia counties. That's up from the 92 counties that was previously reported earlier in the day. And thousands now are losing power in this storm. At latest, around 38 minutes ago, it was reported by CNN that at least 51,000 customers are without power along the Florida Panhandle. And this is before it's actually the hurricane Michael has actually come ashore. Gulf Power estimates that around 33,000 customers, Duke Energy 18,000. Westfront mayor is just hoping for the best. And then obviously President Trump has tweeted his support of Florida as the storm center has sustained winds of about 150 miles an hour this morning. 3.8 million people are under hurricane warnings in Florida's Panhandle and Big Bend regions, along with southeastern Alabama and southern Georgia. Tropical storm warnings cover roughly almost 15.9 million people in those states. And so it's increasingly coming upon us. And then for me, like I always just wonder, there's been this mass evacuation. You had the Florida Governor Rick Scott that's has likened this hurricane to being a monster. And I always just wonder, when they've issued these mass evacuations, why won't people evacuate? And so there was a study that was put out in 2015 by Pacific Standard Magazine. It conducted a survey of those who were rescued from Hurricane Katrina who decided to stay behind even though they were asked to evacuate during that time. What the survey found is that 68% didn't have the money to be able to evacuate, 55% didn't have a car, 25% suffered from a chronic disease, and 14% were disabled. While some viewed evacuations as a necessity, it's just kind of a duh. If the government's going to tell me to leave, why would I not? The reality is that evacuations are a luxury that not all can afford. When you think about it for a second, 68% didn't have the money. Let's hone in on that 68% for a second and just think about some of the costs that are entailed when you are leaving then your home, which you have to think about certain costs. Like, for example, I've got to have a car that has enough gas to be able to get to a safe place. And so we'll say that's two fill-ups, and so that's around $70. And then I think about, okay, well, I've got 2 fill-ups that I've got to get to. Well, then I've got to get back. So we'll say that's another 2 gas tanks, and that's another $70. So now we're up to $140. Well, then I'm moving away from it, but where am I going to stay with that? Well, the numbers are increasingly clear that here in America, individuals don't have as many friends as they used to, nor do we have families not as prevalent, nor are they as close as they used to as well. So we'll operate underneath the assumption that individuals will be staying in a hotel. So we'll say that they're staying in a hotel for 3 days, for example, and we'll just say the hotel cost $70, which would be kind of a lower rate hotel. And so three nights in a $70 hotel, that's $210. Well, now you're up to $210. Well, now you got to think about food because you're away from your kitchen, you're away from your home now. And so we'll say you're eating 3 meals a day that costs $5 over 3 days. So now you're up to $45, and that's not even including if you have children that you're caring for, or if you yourself are going with your partner as well. And so now when we look at these numbers, you've got $140 that you've got for your gasoline. You've got $210 that you've got for your hotel. You've got $45 for food. And that's not counting some of the other ancillary or assorted costs. And so when you add that up, that's $350, that's $395. Well, the reality is that according to a recent study, 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency expense. $395, $400, that's 40% of Americans. This morning, or rather this afternoon, there are many people that simply cannot afford to get out of harm's way, and they now are being forced to bunker down and see if they can make it through. So I would encourage us and encourage you all to join me in praying for God to provide and protect, according to Romans 15:30. They might not be able to get out of it, but God will be there with them through it. And so with that being said, we're going to have to take our first commercial break. But when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking a little bit about Hurricane Michael as it looms down on the Florida Panhandle as well as in Georgia. We'll talk a little bit more about Nikki Haley as well and her surprise resignation that will happen at the end of the year, as well as family life and what are some of the effects that are happening on today's American family. But we got to take a commercial break. But when we come back, more on Hurricane Michael.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Last month, I quoted from Victor Davis Hanson's article on the origins of our Second Civil War. One of his explanations focused on our college campuses, and his insightful analysis is worth more than a few sentences I devoted to it a month ago. He argues that higher education helped split the country in two. For example, college campuses competed for scarcer students by styling themselves as Club Med-type resorts. This included upscale dorms with phenomenal buffets and lavish gyms. In fact, everything a student might want was right there on the campus. This not only increased the cost of college, but shielded them from the realities of the outside world. They graduated with massive student loan debt and headed out into the world as snowflakes. At the same time, universities were becoming more left-wing. Of course, liberal ideas have always had a home on college campuses, but they weren't just liberal, but leftist. As I've tried to document in previous commentaries, there's a striking difference between the two. A liberal would allow different points of view on campus. A leftist would prevent certain views from being expressed and shout down speakers they did not like and believed were not politically correct. Doesn't that sound like what is happening on campus today? Finally, the curriculum on many colleges became therapeutic. Instead, many courses merely attempted to provide reading and study skills that should have been developed in middle school and high school. Hanson writes that so many students left college mostly ignorant of the skills necessary to read, write, and argue effectively, lacking a general body of shared knowledge. He therefore concludes that a generation ignorant, arrogant, and poor is a prescription for social volatility. This is one major reason why we have so much division in America today. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Hey, this is Noel Boucher with the Ministry of Pure Hope, and I just want to take a minute to encourage you to join the team here at Point of View Radio. Our relationship with Point of View Radio has been a great one over the years, and we're so appreciative of the team here, their hard work, but also their commitment to the truth. And that's what they're doing every day, is speaking truth into lies, into misconceptions, into confusion in our culture. And the ministry is powerful. We have been on the show and been able to see healing over the airwaves as we reach people around the country. And you've probably experienced it if you're listening right now. So I want to encourage you, support Kirby and his leadership, support the whole team here at Point of View Radio, because we are changing the world by speaking truth and pointing people to Jesus, who is the truth.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And we are back, and I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and I'm so grateful for Noel Boucher. I am. His whole family is just doing such great work. I'm actually with his wife. I serve on a board called Traffic 911, and so grateful for everything that she does, as well as they do at Pure Hope. And so we are so grateful. But nevertheless, we have been talking about Hurricane Michael. It's looming now on the horizon over in the Florida Panhandle. There's been upwards of 100 states of emergency that have been declared out of Georgia, 108 Georgia counties have declared state of emergencies. The governor Rick Scott of Florida has gone ahead and said that it's a monstrous hurricane, ordered evacuations for individuals. And now many are finding themselves trying to figure out what next. And we were breaking down some of the numbers before the break about why individuals will not get out of harm's way. And we found there was a Pacific Standard Magazine article back in 2015 when it surveyed individuals from Hurricane Katrina asking why they stayed. 68% said they didn't have the money, 55% didn't have a car, 25% suffered a chronic disease, and 14% were physically unable to. But then there was another Yale University study that I thought was very helpful when it broke down certain individuals and their dispositions relative to some of these natural disasters and evacuations. There was a Yale study that was done a little while back. I believe it was done right after Hurricane Maria. And what the Yale study found is it identified 5 different types of people when it came to natural disasters. There was the people known as the first out. Those would have been individuals that when they heard the evacuation that had been issued, they would have been those that would have heeded that immediately and gotten out. That number's around 21% of the survey respondents. There was the constrained, 14%. Those were the individuals that had to figure out what to do with certain assets that they have, or they had a certain constraint to them. So thinking about, for example, individuals that are largely now not only taking care of their immediate family, but also extended family as well, trying to figure that out. That number was around 14%. There were the optimists, which were 16%. Those were individuals that just thought it wouldn't, that they would be able to kind of, they didn't think it was going to be as bad as what it was offered, and so they stayed behind. There was the reluctant, 27%. I would say that probably my family would fall into the reluctant if we were in landlocked Tennessee, so we never got any evacuations. But there were those that were just a little cautious about such mass warnings that were ordered out. And then there were the diehards, there were the 22%. Those are the individuals that aren't necessarily running away from the storm, but running to the storm, the kind of like what you see on Twister. But nevertheless, the top reasons, according to the Yale study, for individuals that would not decide to evacuate, whereas there was the fear of looters. That was something that we saw pretty significantly during Hurricane Katrina, for example, that was taking place. But also there was also pets as well as costs. 33% were worried about looters. 30% knew what to do with their pets. And then it goes back to that reality that about 40% of Americans can't afford an emergency expense that totals up to $400. Many individuals just largely don't have the funds in our current dynamic that we're living in right now. And so it's just for us, it should be a reminder. If you're listening to this right now, you're either listening on Facebook right now, or you're in Minnesota, or here in the Dallas area. It's just a reminder that evacuations are a luxury for many individuals here in the U.S. It just takes a lot of money. We ran through the hypothetical numbers before the break. $140 just to fill up the gas tank a couple of times on the way out, and then a couple of times to get back. $210 for 3 nights at a $70 hotel, which would be hard pressed to find, I would imagine, during that time. And then $45 if you're just eating for $5 every meal, 3 meals a day. And that totals up to $395. And you're probably listening to this right now and you're thinking to yourself, where can you find a bill for $5? That's a great question. I'm just lowballing right here. Where can you find a hotel for $70 a night, especially when you think through taxes? Again, I'm just lowballing it right here, being very conservative with some of my estimates. And then filling up the gas tank 2 times, that's thinking I'm just getting away. But not only am I getting away, but I'm not going to move the car when I am away. And that, just see how quickly the numbers total up, and then just the reality that 40% of Americans can't afford that. They just don't have the funds to be able to access that kind of money. And so it's just, for me, it's just a reminder to think through. Okay, because there was another study that was put out when it looked at individuals that weren't in harm's way during some of these natural disasters. There was almost a degraded perspective that individuals would have towards those individuals that didn't evacuate. And I think it's just important for us to remember during these times is there are some individuals that are more reluctant. There's some individuals that might be more kind of diehard. But at the end of the day, there's just many individuals that extenuating circumstances can't get them out of harm's way. So as we consider Hurricane Michael, which is right there on the coast right now, about to loom in and come on shore in the Florida Panhandle, it's a reminder just to pray for these individuals. I think about, for example, Jesus in Matthew 9. In Matthew 9, he looks out over this crowd of individuals. Many of them are wandering away. He calls them sheep that are cast out and cut up in the latter part of Matthew 9. And when they're cast out, it's this understanding of sheep that are wandering aimlessly. They have no purpose. They have nowhere to go. These would be individuals that when we consider it in the Hurricane Michael perspective, that would largely just be wandering because they're running away from home, and you can never get home when you're running away from home. So these are wandering aimlessly individuals. And then there are individuals that are cut up and hurting, individuals that have suffered from the brokenness of this world and find themselves in a very dire and difficult situation. In the Greek text in Matthew 9, you get this picture that literally they're just bleeding. They're filleted. They're cut up. Individuals that have tried to get out. And what does Jesus do? The text tells us that he had compassion that stirred in his gut, and it caused him to pray. And I think one of the things that we can do, one, is to be able to offer up our prayers to these individuals and pray to God for these individuals, rather, would probably be the more accurate way to say that. Praying to God for these individuals, not only that he would protect, but also that he would provide. And perhaps it could be in the midst of praying that God wouldn't just change, he would change the circumstances that they find themselves in, one, but also he would change us to the extent that we might be able to offer up the hands and feet of Jesus during this time as well. But there's also other news outside of Hurricane Michael. News broke yesterday. Nikki Haley has decided to resign at the end of the year as President Trump's ambassador to the UN. She said on Tuesday she would resign at the end of the year, making another high-profile departure, and also one of the few women in the president's cabinet. Haley said it was a blessing to go to the UN with body armor every day to defend America. She would go on to say, "I'll never truly step aside from fighting for our country, but I will tell you that I think it's time." New York Times reports that many White House staffers were caught off guard by this announcement, which apparently Ms. Haley and President Trump had kept under wraps. The president said that Ms. Haley had informed him of the decision to leave upwards of 6 months ago, and that she wanted to take a break after finishing 2 years in the administration. I think it's just a reminder that public service really is service, and service always requires sacrifice, and sacrifice always entails more than just the individuals that are taking the office. But as many of us know, we don't simply just go to work. Our family often sacrifices with us while we're at work as well. And so when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, because Nikki Haley was one of the individuals that in a very divisive country right now, especially when with regard to President Trump, she was an individual that received a widespread approval, not only on the right, but also on the left as well, indicative from everything from her Senate approval numbers as well as to her approval numbers as she's leaving office, according to the latest Quinnipiac poll when it came to favorability towards Nikki Haley. We'll highlight some of those numbers, but we'll also go back and we'll look at some of the accomplishments she's made thus far during her short tenure in New York as the U.S. ambassador to the UN. But we've got to take a break. And so when we come back from the break, more on Nikki Haley, and we'll also be opening up the phone lines as well here shortly. So we'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team. or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this Wednesday, October 10th, 2018 day, we have been talking about everything from Hurricane Michael that, again, looms right outside right off the shore of the Florida Panhandle, and then we transitioned a little bit to talk about a little bit about Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley, of course, announced yesterday. It's just fascinating how quickly this news cycle moves. It seems as though it was forever ago, but nevertheless, that was just yesterday, less than 24 hours ago, that Nikki Haley announced her intent to resign at the end of the year as President Trump's ambassador to the UN. She would resign at the end of the year. Yet again, another high-profile departure as one of the few women in the president's cabinet. She said that it was a blessing to go to the UN with body armor every day and defend America. She said, quote, "I'll never truly step aside from fighting for our country, but I will tell you that I think it's time." This caught many staffers off guard, apparently. This was a closely guarded secret, according to the New York Times reporting, that indicated that the president said that Nikki Haley had informed him roughly 6 months ago that she wanted to take a break after finishing 2 years with the administration. He said she hoped she would stay on longer, but that a successor would be named in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And there have already been circulations and rumors as to who that next person could be. When asked if the president's daughter, also the senior advisor to the president, Ivanka Trump, he said that she would make a great ambassador. But in a tweet earlier, I believe today or late last night, I can't remember, she said that she is honored by the suggestion, but she is perfectly happy where she is right now. During the press conference, Nikki Haley even lauded some of the efforts of Jared Kushner as well, calling him one of the hidden geniuses of the White House. And I can tell you from personal experience, being able to having the privilege to be able to attend a meeting at the White House, Jared Kushner is just very much a brilliant individual that he's bringing his capacities and a commercial real estate businessman background to everything from the Israel portfolio as well as criminal justice reform. He's offering a fresh take on some old problems and really is just doing phenomenal work there as well. But it appears as though he will stay close by in the West Wing. But there are also other individuals that were former West Wingers that have been named. Their names have been circulated around. Dina Powell, formerly was a senior advisor. I believe she served in the White House. I can't remember her official capacity. She has since the end of last year, gone back to Goldman Sachs, where she's serving as one of the as an individual that is serving in leadership there. She has been rumored, and she is currently mulling it to add to the conspiracy that potentially it could be Dina Powell. There was a picture that was taken last weekend where Ms. Powell, as well as Ambassador Haley, were on a boat together with their husbands, spending some time together as well. So there is much that is being made about that as well. But let's think back before we start thinking about the future and who could potentially be named as a possible successor to Nikki Haley. Let's think back because as I wrote this morning in the daily briefing, good endings leave you fulfilled, but unexpected endings leave you wanting more. What's fascinating is that this whole thing started during the 2016 election, where then Governor Haley of South Carolina lent her support and endorsed Senator Marco Rubio from Florida in the primary campaign season. But as we know, Marco Rubio did not make it out of the primary, nor did Nikki Haley escape the, I guess you would say, the Twitter wrath of then candidate Trump as well. But she would experience going back and forth with President Trump on Twitter, but in true Southern fashion, Nikki Haley, in a response to kind of a derogatory remark that President Trump offered her, she said, "Bless your heart," which is just one of my favorite sayings out of the South, the passive aggressiveness of it and the ambiguity in it, rather. But nevertheless, she experienced some of that hospitality from then candidate Trump in the 2016 election. But President Trump still appointed her at the start of his presidency to the ambassador position at the UN. And as we remember, that there was the appointment, but also the confirmation process. If you go back to the confirmation times at the very beginning of the presidency, it's stretched out for so long, so it's not simply just the beginning. It was stretching out even upwards to a year process for many individuals. I'm thinking about Grindel, that's now the ambassador in Germany that stretched out more than a year, rather, or Betsy DeVos, who barely got by, required Vice President Pence to offer the tie-breaking vote. It was a very divisive process for the president to be able to get through his individuals that he wanted to serve in his cabinet as well as in his administration. But notice this, Haley was confirmed to her post with a 96-4 vote back in early 2017. There was a wide bipartisan support of her in that particular position, but there was also some hesitation as well with her in that position. Some of the common critiques or complaints or some of the words that were offered during that time were she's only a governor. How is she supposed to know international foreign affairs in this position? But besides some of the complaints that were originally offered, now she is leaving with bipartisan support. The latest Quinnipiac poll had that number at 63% approval rating, to the extent that even it's one thing for your friends to back you. It's another thing for, quote unquote, the other side to back you as well. In the New York Times op-ed page, which has been no friend, I would say, to conservatives, the New York Times op-ed page this morning said she will be missed and offered some kind remarks to her as well. So her achievements and strong leadership supply the evidence for such a high approval rating that ran across party lines. Let's think back to some of those instances for a second. When dealing with Russia, she pointedly asked the country backing the Assad regime in Syria how many more children have to die before Russia cares. When experiencing blowback due to our support of Israel, and specifically when Israel decided to move the embassy as well as the capital recognition of the capital, she called the UN Human Rights Council the greatest failure due to their political corruption. If the numbers are correct, most would say she served well. But like most service, it comes at a cost. And when you serve in government, you sacrifice. Many of these individuals that have decided to serve leadership of our country, there are a variety of costs they're taking on. They're working much longer hours than what the average American would be working. They're also taking a pretty significant pay cut as well. We know that in a free market economy, it gives you the opportunity to be able to get paid what you're worth. And many of these individuals are willing to take that pay cut that they could get in the private sector in order to go serve in the public sector and in government as well. And there was a financial disclosure form that was released in 2018, and it noted that she had around $1.5 million of debt, as well as $1 million mortgage that was just looming right there as well. So there was a great sacrifice that she took just from a financial picture of what we know, not even considering some of the other sacrifices that she has made. But like most service, it comes at a cost. But nevertheless, great honor comes with the title, significant responsibilities come with the office, but great sacrifices are required by the family. Plato noted one of the penalties of refusing to participate in politics is that you end up being governed by your inferiors. But because Haley heeded the call, the country is better and the world is safer. This may be an unexpected end of a good season, but endings can shock us just as much as beginnings can surprise us. And so we are, I would say, when you look at what she has done relative to North Korea, the stands that she has taken with Syria as well as Russia, that it continues to go without end, but she has served her country well, and we are exceedingly grateful for her participation as well as for her support and just her strong voice. It will be missed. But if I was a betting man with an individual, not that I'm a betting man because, no, I'm just kidding. I won't get into that discussion. That this wouldn't be the last that we will see of her as well. With those type of numbers and this type of environment and just her intellect as well as her servant's heart, I would imagine that you never say never in politics, and we will probably be seeing her again. And so nevertheless, we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit more. I want to shift gears a little bit, move away from the hurricane, move away from Nikki Haley, and talk a little bit about family life. There's some fascinating new research out there about what having children, some of the time and really some of the numbers of how your life changes when you have children as a married couple. And so we'll be looking at some of those numbers as well as we'll be taking some of your phone calls as well. We'll open up the phone lines. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. But we've also got Facebook, facebook.com. YouTube.com/Point of View Radio. If you go down to that live video box that you'll see, unfortunately, when you get scared and you see me, you can just stop. And I know it's going to be, there's the fight or flight response. Don't fight me, just don't flight from me. So what I'm trying to say is just fight the urge to want to move away from the screen, and then be sure to make your fingers flight in order that you can just type a question or comment. And what you put online, we'll try to share over air as well, some of the questions that you might have over what we've talked about or what we are talking about. But we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to look at some of the numbers relative to family life in the U.S. in 2018, right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. To those who seek to better the world through the understanding of God's physical laws and innovation of practical solutions. That was the inscription Dr. Mike McCracken wanted on the plaque of the new conference room, paid for by his donations to Purdue University and placed in honor of the people who inspired him the most, his parents. But the university rejected the language. According to their legal analysis, the inclusion of the phrase God's physical laws could be seen as an endorsement of religion, violating the Constitution. There are dozens of plaques throughout the campus. Most identify alumni or donors. In the Student Center, a large display of plaques features the bronze images of past presidents and a quote of theirs. There are quotes from past graduates like Neil Armstrong and even plaques with quotes from Socrates and Aristotle. So why would the university proudly display plaques featuring quotes from astronauts, ancient philosophers, and even past presidents, but refuse an alumnus wishing to honor his parents with a passing reference to God's laws? Good question. By permitting plaques to display secular quotations but refusing religious references, the university was committing what we call viewpoint discrimination. But after a letter pointing that out and some discussions over the phone, Purdue agreed to redo the plaque to make it clear that the reference to God's physical laws was coming from Dr. McCracken and not the university. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Point of View is a part of my daily life, and I know of no other radio program that helps its listeners to develop, articulate, and then defend a biblical worldview as successfully as yours does. For those reasons, I consider it an honor to be able to support Point of View financially, and I would encourage all of your listeners, both young and old, to prayerfully consider doing the same.
I just turned your program on, and I want to just let you know how much I appreciate just getting the truth out.
I really appreciate your program. It's really a blessing to me and to all of us.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I am so grateful that you decided to join us on this Wednesday, October 10th day. We're going to transition a little bit during the first part of the show. We were talking a little bit about the resignation of Nikki Haley, and then also about Hurricane Michael that is looming right off the shore of the Florida Panhandle. But we're going to switch to some social science research that I was uncovering in the daily briefing this morning. And so if you're listening right now, you can go to pointofview.net, and pointofview.net, you'll be able to click there for today's show. You'll see a menu of some of the articles that we've been talking about, and specifically you'll see one for the daily briefing. And if you go to the daily briefing website, and if you click that link, you'll go to article number 4. The daily briefing is a labor of love I do at Dallas Baptist University. Dallas Baptist, I'm all over the place for them and grateful to be able to serve them. And so one of the places that I was last week that I couldn't be here with you all was in Boston, kind of teaching about revolutionary leadership. Specifically, I did my dissertation and research on President John F. Kennedy in that election in 1960, so shared a little bit about that as well. I tried not to make our students too bored while I was lecturing on that, but then also was doing the daily briefing every morning. I lead an organization called the Institute for Global Engagement, which is an internal think tank at Dallas Baptist University. And one of the things I do is I try to highlight particular articles that I think are going to be driving the day, 1, or 2, reveal the spirit of the day. So help us to make sense of the world that we're living around and look at some of the numbers that kind of help us in that particular area. And so during the kind of the cultural news, I'll oftentimes highlight some of those interesting articles that speak to just everyday life. And so this morning it was everything from a new study confirms growing up with a home filled with books is good for you, to another study that said the best bosses are humble bosses out of Wall Street Journal. But this morning, or this afternoon rather, with you all, I want to focus in on a Detroit News article that was number 4 in the daily briefing that says that new study shows that parents get about half an hour of me time every day. You see, this study analyzed the lives of 2,000 moms and dads and found the average parent has a little more than a half hour free time every day. But to get there, parents have got to go through a little bit, especially if you're raising little boys known as Nick and Ryan, Nicholas Pitts as well as Ryan Pitts. You've got to go through quite a bit to be able to put up with us. But nevertheless, the study indicated that parents said they hide from their children 4 times per week just so they can get a little bit of time to relax. And that's due to 32% of parents saying they're working until at least 8 p.m. when factoring in their workplace and parental duties. So apparently the Eagles aren't the only ones living life in the fast lane. Some of the other research that pointed this out is it said on average parents skip about 227 proper meals every year. Now, my brother has got a little 4-year-old niece that is absolutely perfect. And I am reminded of them skipping meals is because whenever I go back to Tennessee and I get a chance to eat with them, one of them usually has to skip the meal in order to take care of her while she is going to town on her mac and cheese. And she also has a great affinity for ketchup, which is just ketchup being the reminder of God's goodness and grace in this broken world. But nevertheless, 88% admitted that the busyness kept them from cooking. 96% said the lack of time leads them to serve less than healthy food. No word on if Chick-fil-A nuggets count as healthy. Another study found that parents are spending more time with their children than they ever have before. It's been termed lawnmower parenting, one might say. They're spending, moms are spending on average 104 minutes per day with their child. Dads, upwards of 59 minutes, it's saying. This reminded me of a new book that's out that I want to highly recommend to you all. It's called The Storm-Tossed Family by Russell Moore. Moore notes the paradox of modern parenthood. He says, quote, the future children bring is one of joy, but also one of sacrifice. Sacrifice, but also of joy. Difficulties abound and troubles are unimaginable. Yet, according to Moore, the gospel of Jesus changes everything. He says, quote, the only safe harbor for a storm-tossed family is a nail-scarred home. Difficulties abound, troubles await, but the abundant grace of God is sufficient, as we hear in 2 Corinthians 9:8 as well as 9:12. But that's also another interesting point that brings up, which is another study that I was found in, which is article number 3 in the Daily Briefing, that confirmed growing up in a home filled with books is actually good for you. According to Pacific Standard. This confirms that people who grew up with books at home tend to have higher reading comprehension and better mathematical and digital communication skills. The magic number, according to the study, seems to be 80, according to researchers out of Australia. Those who had around 80 books at home tended to have average scores for literacy, and this is defined as the ability to read effectively, to participate in society, and achieve personal goals. If you own less than 80 books, this was associated with below average literacy. The numbers continue, so the higher number of books that you had above 80, it continued to increase that literacy rate up to 350. So Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young insist that their house is a very, very, very fine house, but count me skeptical because of the two cats in the yard. Interestingly enough, over the last 42 years, the average new house has increased in size by over 1,000 square feet. But unfortunately, more room does not equate to more books. One study found that middle-income neighborhoods, the ratio is 13 books per child. Imagine that. So for every child in a middle-income neighborhood, think about your household for a second. Think about the number of children you have, and think about the number of books that you have that are on display in your home. According to the study, the ratio is 13 books per child. In low-income neighborhoods, the ratio is 1 book for every 300 children. So you're walking into these homes, and there's no books, which is unimaginable, which I think my housemates would probably say that's probably heaven, because I've got quite a few books that I just love to read. I can't help it, but I don't have any kids, so that's whole another issue. But let's think about this for a second, because if you're like me, you're thinking pretty skeptically. You're like, okay, maybe they don't own books, maybe they're just going to the library. Well, think again. Relative to library usage, only 48% of kids under the age of 16 have visited a public library in the previous year. It appears as though they haven't gotten over the bump to experience the thrills of reading Goosebumps, of joining James on his giant peach. David Foster Wallace asserted that our entertainment age can put us into a cage, and not only that, over time we'll come to actually enjoy the cage. Entertainment can lull us, but reading can fill us with a type of zeal, according to John Green. In the scriptures, we read how reading emboldens the spirit, convicts the conscience, and encourages the faint-hearted. God repeatedly in Joshua 1, in that famous passage that many of us know by heart, he continues to say, meditate upon the word of the Lord. But joining the meditation on the word of the Lord is also this idea of being strong and courageous, showing a relationship between reminding us who the God of the Bible is, as well as what he's done, and that being proportional to the amount of strength and courage that we have. You see, love turns a house into a home, but books can transform a couch surfer into a change agent. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we've got a special guest that'll be joining us in studio, Will Dowell of the organization Behind Every Door. So you're going to want to stick around for that, as well as we'll be taking some of your phone calls as well as Facebook. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212, or log on to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. What you share online, we'll try to get to over air. We'll be back right after this.
April 18th, 1775. The long-feared approach of danger was now real. The British were moving, and Paul Revere mounted his horse for a ride that would go down in history in the battle for American liberty. 2 beacons were placed in the steeple of the Old North Church, alerting the people in Charlestown the Redcoats were coming by sea. 2 beacons shining in the night, signaling our forefathers to make their stand. Today's threats to our freedom are perhaps less visible than an army on the move, but they are no less real. Where are today's beacons, today's defenders of liberty? One is Point of View Radio. The other is you. Together, let us stand for all of our freedoms to preserve what our founders won. Be the fire in our beacon today by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Join the fight this week at pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team, or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts, on this Wednesday, October 10th, 2018 day. Welcome to National Bring Your Teddy Bear to Work Day. Unfortunately, I did not bring my teddy bear. One of our producers does have a nun that is like a puppet, so I don't know if that constitutes as a teddy bear, but nevertheless, we are so glad that you decided to join us today. During the first hour, we were talking about everything from Hurricane Michael to Nikki Haley offering her resignation at the end of the year, which was kind of came as a surprise to many and saddened all, just based on her approval numbers, as well as just her confirmation vote in early 2017. And 96 senators in a very divisive Senate were able to vote for approve her. And so now speculation begins to run relative to who will replace her. But coming up in the second hour, we've got a special guest that's joining us in studio today. We've got Will Dowell of Behind Every Door. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, talking during the break to Will, you're in for a treat, and this is going to be really fun, just very sharp, and excited to hear more about Behind Every Door and some of the needs that are being met in the community because of the work that they are doing. Will, so great to join. So great to have you here today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, very neat, very neat. And so tell us a little bit about yourself, Will. So you're a University of Texas guy. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm from Tennessee, and so when you said UT, I immediately thought back to the Volunteers. But nevertheless, here in Texas, that's a University of Texas thing, Longhorns. And so tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah, grew up in Houston and made my way to Austin for school. Stayed there and for about 2.5 years working for Campus Crusade. Doing ministry in the Greek system.
Okay.
We talked about that earlier, both being and coming out of the Greek system. And enjoyed that. Had a really fantastic time doing that. And it's interesting, some of the connections from that to the work that I do now that I could never have dreamt of.
Wow.
But met my wife, and she ended up moving to Austin. When we got married, we made our way up here to Dallas, which led me to group that was starting Behind Every Door, and jumped in with them right there at the beginning.
That's phenomenal. So tell us a little bit about this organization, Behind Every Door.
Sure. So we exist really to bring the fullness of the love of God to transform lives in underserved neighborhoods. And we want to transform lives in that context, not just people who live there, but also people who may live in different neighborhoods but are coming to volunteer or to give or whatever it may be. And so our heart really is to see people experience the fullness of who God says they are, the fullness of who God says He is in that neighborhood.
Wow.
And so what we do is we go into low-income apartment communities. We put a team of people, usually start with 2, design a community center, make that feel like a home, set up really a family-like structure, and then offer comprehensive programming that addresses all the needs somebody's facing when they're in poverty at the same time, on site, in that environment.
Wow. So it's more than simply just teaching. It's more than just preaching a message. It's really showing the message. So like even what Jesus said, not just to love them in word, but also in deed as well.
Yeah. 1 Corinthians 2. I've been reading it this week, and it talks about Paul talks about this message, this wisdom, but that he didn't come speaking in human wisdom, but that he came demonstrating the power of God. And I think in some ways we've gotten away from that. And so as an organization, we want to demonstrate the power of God, whether that be through literacy, whether that be through prayer, whether that be through whatever it may be, but we want to demonstrate.
That's so rich. And I'm thinking about how that's meeting just such a tangible need, because I'm thinking about it from the perspective of So you talk about the family unit, knowing that 41% of children today are born into unwed families. I'm thinking about how 51% of Americans don't know their neighbors' names right? And so not only are you trying to demonstrate a family union, but also you're trying to build together these communities, because if we believe it to be true, the communities are some of the foundational components of our society. You really are going in and meeting a very significant need.
I think that's exactly right. And you're hitting the nail on the head with the family. I mean, it is essential. And you think about, your own journey and my own journey, family, and that can look different, right? It might have been parents, could have been aunts and uncles, could have been just a close friend or a teacher.
Yeah.
But somebody treated you like family along the way.
That's so rich. So tell us, what does that specifically look like when you go into some of these areas? What are some of the manifestations of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you a story. So when we went into one of the communities, it's called Village Oaks. It's in Southeast Oak Cliff, one of the highest crime areas of the city, and really a desert in so many ways. Food desert, job desert, just a desert.
Wow.
And in going in, we met a guy named Corey. And Corey came in. We asked him to draw a picture where he felt safe, and he drew the community center. And through a series of questions, his comments to us were that is where there were the least amount of windows, and he was afraid of being shot.
Wow.
And in truth, there's plenty of windows, but that's just his reality.
Yeah.
So what happened with him is my mind immediately went to his school, which is about 400 yards across the street. He walks, J.P. Starks. And you imagine him sitting in a classroom, and he's got windows down one side and a hallway in the other. Traditional classroom. Well, now imagine Corey sitting next to a window. You'd be terrified.
Yeah.
But from a teacher's perspective, she may not, or he may not have that information, and they're going, well, why aren't you paying attention? It could be ADD, could be lack of interest, could be just can't keep up. And any of those could have been true for me, so that's why I offer those for him. But in truth, it's just he's terrified. Come home, he's eating hot Cheetos with nacho cheese poured in the bag, which is a traditional meal that happens often for kids in our communities. It's the only thing he eats that day. Not necessarily because food wasn't offered, but maybe he's never eaten food like is being offered at school, and so he doesn't want to eat it. So with that one child, you have a nutrition issue, you have a safety issue, and he can't read because he's, on average, with kids we serve, are 2 grades behind in literacy.
Wow.
So if we don't address all 3 of those at the same time, it doesn't matter because his frontal lobe's so on fire from being terrified, he won't be able to actually hold in and retain that information. If we address the nutrition issue, then his brain would grow the way that my kids' brains are growing, getting proper nutrition. But without safety, you have that issue. So you have to do both of those at the same time in order for him to actually learn how to read. But if you do those 2 things, but you don't teach him to read, he doesn't get to where he wants to go.
Yeah.
So we're constantly designing, like I mentioned, comprehensive programming to address all of these issues at the same time, because Corey and anybody else in his situation are facing all of them at the same time.
Wow.
We can't do just one thing at a time.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's phenomenal. And so we're talking with Will Dowell right now of the organization Behind Every Door. We're going to have to take a break, but when we come back from the break, I'm really interested to hear what got the organization started, as well as what got Will involved in the organization. We'll be talking a little bit about that, as well as we'll be opening up some of the phone lines for you. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We'll be taking some of your phone calls about Behind Every Door, about meeting tangible needs, but then also opening up the opportunity to be able not only to show the love of Jesus, but also hopefully to be able to tell the love of Jesus as well with our words, both and our deeds. We're also on Facebook, so you can log on to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You see the live video box right there. I apologize that you have to see me, but then right underneath it, you can offer up a comment or a question, and what you share online, we'll try to share over air as well. But we've got to take a commercial break. When we come back from the commercial break, more from Will Dowell of Behind Every Door.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Last month, I quoted from Victor Davis Hanson's article on the origins of our Second Civil War.
One of his explanations focused on our college campuses, and his insightful analysis is worth more than a few sentences I devoted to it a month ago. He argues that higher education helps split the country in two. For example, college campuses competed for scarcer students by styling themselves as Club Med-type resorts. This included upscale dorms with phenomenal buffets and lavish gyms. In fact, everything a student might want was right there on the campus. This not only increased the cost of college, but shielded them from the realities of the outside world. They graduated with massive student loan debt and headed out into the world as snowflakes. At the same time, universities were becoming more left-wing. Of course, liberal ideas have always had a home on college campuses, but they weren't just liberal, but leftist. As I've tried to document in previous commentaries, there's a striking difference between the two. A liberal would allow different points of view on campus. A leftist would prevent certain views from being expressed and shout down speakers they did not like and believed were not politically correct. Doesn't that sound like what is happening on campus today? Finally, the curriculum on many colleges became therapeutic. Instead, many courses merely attempted to provide reading and study skills that should have been developed in middle school and high school. Hansen writes that so many students left college mostly ignorant of the skills necessary to read, write, and argue effectively, lacking a general body of shared knowledge. He therefore concludes that a generation ignorant, arrogant, and poor is a prescription for social volatility. This is one major reason why we have so much division in America today. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth. Dr. Sean McDowell.
We clearly live in difficult times, especially for Christians. Sometimes it feels like the culture is just turning against us quickly. We need to speak up with compassion, but we need to speak up with truth in the way that Jesus did. That's one reason why I'm a big fan of Point of View, is they're dealing with cutting-edge, controversial subjects that the church sometimes doesn't want to deal with. But they do their homework, they do it informed, they also do it in a way that's practical so we understand the issues but know what we can do about them. Ministries like Point of View can only survive with the help of listeners. One of the reasons I think Point of View is so valuable is because they just deal with the cutting issues of the day in a manner that's informed, in a manner that's gracious, and in a manner that's making a difference. Point of View is standing up for truth, and they need your help.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined in studio today by Will Dowell of the organization Behind Every Door. So very grateful for Mr. McDowell and that ringing endorsement of really wanting to speak biblical truth to some of the cultural issues that we're facing today. And not only are we going to be speaking truth, but we're also going to be speaking with Will Dowell that's doing more than just talking about some of these issues, but really is acting on it as well as just organizing this phenomenal organization. So we have Behind Every Door really is trying to go into communities and build up these communities, support these individuals in order that they might be able to more fully pursue after the American dream that our founders have fought, our founders envisioned, and so many have fought and died for it as well. So Will, tell us a little bit about how did you become involved in Behind Every Door?
Great question. So my wife and I were living in Austin. She's from here, and I had been doing a startup in Austin without going into tons of details. That was beginning to take a different turn, and so we were pumping all of the dollars into building a website. I was 2 weeks into marriage at that point, and it was kind of like, hey guys, I need to make a living here. So brief interjection of hanging Christmas lights to pay our bills in the interim, which again, still to this day plays a role in some of the way that I think and do this work, just from some things that I experienced during those 4 or 5 months. But it led to this place of saying, all right, I got to get a job that is going to work long term. And so talked to my father-in-law who was here. He had been talking to really 4 people who were praying behind every door into existence. And it was taking off, beginning to launch. And Allison and I, my wife, moved here to join them right at the beginning of 2010, and kind of jump in the deep end in one apartment community at the time. But within about 10 months, we were in a second.
Wow.
And that's how I jumped in.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And so tell us a little bit about the history behind Every Door. It seems as though there was a genesis to it. Obviously, you jumped in pretty close to right at the beginning of it. So what was it, just an extenuating need that just continued to be pressing into the community? Or was it just kind of being able just to have the foresight to know that this could potentially be a need?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both.
Okay.
You had these 4 couples, I mean, and they were husband and wives, really with unique experiences in life, from pastors to real estate experience in real estate. Somebody really had done something very similar, and so they all kind of threw their ideas together, and then with prayer, this thing came out. But in truth, really, I think we jumped in the deep end and didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah,
and just tried to figure it out. And I think in July of 2013, I had an opportunity to step into the role of executive director, and we continued that swimming in the deep end. I think the raft had been built a little bit. And then I think where we are today is we actually have something that is working.
Yeah. So for our listeners that aren't in Dallas right now, I think it's pretty important to understand kind of some of the difficulty in Dallas, because there's great economic inequality, I guess would be probably one of the understatements. So help us to understand the need here in Dallas.
Great. So some reports that were published in the last few years by the city. We've landed, this may have changed since then, but as of a few years ago, we were number 1 for child poverty in cities over 1 million. We were number 3 for poverty in general for cities over 1 million, behind Detroit and Memphis. 45% of our population lives south of the Trinity, or on the other side of the Trinity, if you're looking at West Dallas. And yet it comprises, I think it's about 15 to 20% of the tax base. And so these are significant issues, and the mayor has rightly shined a spotlight and said, just from an economic perspective, this isn't going to work long term. It's not sustainable. I think then you add in a Christian perspective, and there's an injustice, and God's heart is for the poor, and it's that really that we would be thriving together, and yet this black eye that most people I've found don't have a clue exists here in Dallas is not at all, in my opinion, what God intends.
Yeah. So when you were going back to your earlier stories, kind of in the beginning, you were recounting some. There's the piece that there's the food part. There's the educate. It's really hard to teach a student to read when he's hungry, and then there's the safety component. And there's so many various factors right now that are going into the experience of someone that's living kind of south in Dallas right now. And it kind of goes back to the reality of kind of what Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's really hard to self-actualize. It's really hard to think about some of the luxuries of life, and education being one of those luxuries, if we're just being very honest, when you don't even have the survival needs that are being met, when you don't have a house, a roof over your head, when you don't, where you don't know if there's going to be a bullet that's going to come across. And so that really is just, it's not just something theoretical. That's something that's actually going down right now, just a few miles south of here.
That's exactly right. A few years ago, a connection through one of our community directors came from Africa, having worked in some of the slums in South Africa. And he was walking around one of our communities, and he said, physically, this is much better. But he said, emotionally, this is far worse. And there's just a lack of there's an immense amount of hopelessness that I don't know that, if you talk to somebody in a community that they would communicate to you, I don't have hope, right? But because they do have hope, but it's a different kind of hope, and it's in the context of their community.
Yeah.
But that hope that you and I dream about with regard to the American dream, and not that that's the end all be all, but even just this opportunity to progress, looks very different in a neighborhood like that.
Yeah, I think about some of the millennial statistics right now, especially since Millennial Roundtable. We'll think about this, that the millennials are the first generation that things have not been better because the previous generation, like it's just an even hand right now. And I think about that from a kind of a middle class standpoint. I can't imagine something lower than that. And then I think it was really interesting too how you're addressing when you're going into these neighborhoods, going into some of these family units, and really trying to build up. You're really doing it in a very unconventional way, I would argue, because it's not simply just making sure that they're fed. It's also the family demonstration that's before it, trying to build up some of those community centers that sometimes we would think of as luxuries, but are in reality are kind of significant factors when it comes to prosperity within some of these communities. Yes.
Yes. While you're speaking, the thought that came to my head is, we often have to do mercy because justice isn't present. But there's a point, right, where mercy has to begin shifting towards justice. And I think we're maybe right there at that shift where we kind of go back and forth between mercy in the sense that, gosh, like, people just need to eat. People need clothing.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But then there's also that sense of like, well, there's an injustice here too, in the sense that, there's no jobs and there's a reason for that. Right. And people don't always like to hear the answer, but there's a reason for some of those things. And it's not because people in that community are lazy. It's not because people in that community don't want to work or whatever. It's because it's been that way for a long period of time. And we haven't dealt with it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So we're talking to Will Dowell right now, of organization Behind Every Door. We're going to have to take a break. When we come back from the break, we'll take some of your phone calls, as well as I see some Facebook comments piling up. So we'll address some of those as well. But I've also got a couple of new questions that I want to ask Will. There's just I've been interested in some research out everything from having a picture of your family displayed in your home to even little things of having families that would just walk around some of these areas. There are these little extenuating little circumstances that you don't realize the power that they hold, because again, when you're in prosperity, you typically tend to become numb to those little things, but those things they're powerful factors that allow individuals not only to experience a level of optimism, but also be able to generate some hope within them. So we'll talk with Will a little bit about that. We'll as well take some of your phone calls. So again, 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or facebook.com/pointofviewradio. So when we get back, we'll speak more with Will Dowell of Behind Every Door right after this.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined in studio by Will Dowell of Behind Every Door organization. And sometimes I wish that you all could listen in on some of the conversations that we have off air, because it's just so illuminating. So what we're going to try to do is recreate to the certain extent, try to take out my cussing. Just kidding. What we were talking about off air as well. So Will, tell us a little bit about some of this marketing campaign that's going to be coming out. That's a fascinating story that you have that I think illuminates just the heart of what's happening Behind Every Door.
Yes. So over the years, so much of my heart has changed. I mean, a lot of this work is what God has done in my own life, maybe even in greater ways than what we've seen happen. And one of those things for me has been really a narrative change in my own mind and heart. And although it got challenged yesterday again by a staff member who helped me see some places where I have some blind spots, but we're going to be shifting some of our marketing pieces to change the narrative and the way that we talk about somebody growing up in a low socioeconomic situation and all of the factors that go with that. And so, we use this name Corey, and Corey is a real person. It's not the name of the child that I've been talking about, but it honors a kid that I knew well and who died in a tragic incident in one of our communities. And so we're using his name and honoring his life, but telling the story like this. Imagine a child who has aspirations of becoming an entrepreneur, who loves to ride their bike with their friends and play on the playground, who likes to sit down at the dinner table with their parents and have dinner. And I imagine when I say that to you, you may, like me, think, oh yeah, that was part of my life experience, or that's what I want for my kids, or that's what I think everybody should have. And so that's really the story we want to tell. But then the next piece behind it is, now I want you to know the circumstances that child lives in their neighborhood. He has a 1% chance of graduating from high school, the highest percentage chance of going to prison, just based on his zip code. He's not eating a healthy, nutritious meal. He can't read. And so we want to separate Corey, a child, an adult, who that person is, an image bearer of God is who they are, with hopes and dreams and bold visions that God has put within them, from the circumstances that often are a gigantic mountain in the way of getting to that bold vision. We faced mountains on the way to our bold visions. But again, we had family that might have stepped in and removed those, or we had a neighborhood that didn't have those. And so again, we want to separate the person from the circumstances.
That's so rich. I think about what Arthur Brooks, who's at the American Enterprise Institute, he has a book out called Gross National Happiness. And what he's found is that there are 4 characteristics for individuals that typically can be characterized as being happy. And what he says, those 4 characteristics are 1, individuals that come from family, that have a family. So it's people that love you even when they don't like you. And then it goes back to our number of 41% of children that are born today are born into unwed families. If you just isolate that and you think about African Americans, for example, that number jumps up at least 20 points. And so, one, you take away that factor. So then you think about, well, what about friends? Well, average American, 3.7 friends. 25 years ago has jumped down to 1.7. But we also know the propensity of friends shape us. Like, I am who I am largely because of the friends that I think about in college. I think about the friends in church. I think about those friends in my neighborhood. All of those people are much more successful than I am, but the success that they were driven to has largely rubbed off on me, and it doesn't allow me just to stay in the status quo. There's the ambition, there's the drive, and to know that shaping influence. So you've got family, you've got friends, you got a worldview. Help me make sense of the world. When the Coreys of this world died tragically, help me to make sense of that. From a biblical perspective, we just call that a Christian worldview. But again, and then we think about from the 4th, you have a sense of work. Somebody is needing you to show up on Monday morning. And so we think about the narrative of that and how blessed I've been, how blessed many have been. But now we think about when you go into some of these areas, those 4 factors are so missing right now and so absent in the experience of so many of these kids that have done nothing but be born.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So So help us a little bit more. Help us to understand, because I think some popular conceptions. I'm thinking about the book right now. So Our Kids by Robert Putnam. He's got this phenomenal book that indicates that there's their kids and our kids. And a part of upward mobility is this idea of the two different classes, what we would say, or two different socioeconomic statuses coming together so that lessons can be taught that aren't necessarily in books. There's the connections that can be made that shows upward mobility when those classes come together. But now we're living in a very fragmented age. And in the fragmented age, what Putnam is going to say is there's just these labels that get put onto people. And one of those labels that I think probably some of our listeners have probably heard of is the idea of those kids, their kids, not our kids, but their kids they're lazy. Like, help us to understand some of that, of what's going on.
Man, there's a lot there. So I've got a friend.
Yeah.
He runs kind of a company that's probably got, 60, 70 employees. He manages a warehouse. He's got to deal with product loss. He's got to deal with all the marketing. He's got to deal with all of the distribution, all the sales, HR, accounting. I mean, it's a big operation. And he makes, $5,000 a week, sometimes more like 10. It just depends on the week. And now, I've told you that, he's a drug dealer.
Oh, wow.
So is he lazy? Absolutely not. In fact, he's brilliant. He's got CEO qualities. He's just applying those skills in a very different way. Am I advocating for drug dealing? No, I think it's harmful. It hurts communities. It breaks families apart. People die. It's awful. And in this case, it is an indicator that laziness actually would be a horrible label to put on somebody like that. There's so much there. I think when you bring up the concept of labels is really important here, and it has to go with narrative. And we just unfortunately have gotten to this place where words have become cheap when we use them. But what we have not realized is that they're not cheap when we hear them.
Yeah.
Like they're very powerful to us. And so when we use words like lazy or aggressive or dangerous, those say something to us, right? And I may say, oh, that's a dangerous neighborhood. And that immediately means something to you. But like, I've got to actually think that through. What is it actually that I mean and intend to say? And is it fair? Is it right? Did I rightly apply that word? I don't have a problem with descriptive words. I think they're essential. But am I actually rightly describing the situation or not?
That's really good. So help us to understand what is Behind Every Door doing to be able to change some of these narratives. So I'm thinking about just some of those words that you say, because again, laziness doesn't characterize. It's just what we would argue, what I guess I would argue is just the misdirection, misapplication of the energies that are being put forward. That's one, against the law, and then two, is harmful for communities. And so what is Behind Every Door doing to be able to try to change the narrative of some of these communities?
That's great question. I think first, I think one essential thing is to start with a foundation of who God says we are, which Genesis 1. We are created in the image of God. That's who God. That's the foundation. And I think if we don't start there, we are going to lose our way really quick. It may sound good, but ultimately I'll demonize somebody else because they're getting in the way of my agenda, when in reality, we're all created in the image of God. I think we have to start there. And then I think it's a matter of following Scripture to understand and interact with the heart of God. He sees us at our best when we're at our worst. Gideon was a coward, and he was threshing wheat because he was afraid. And God says, "Get up, mighty warrior." Like, he's calling out who he becomes. Yeah. Which, mind you, Gideon never fought anybody. At least not in the 300 men thing where he drove out the army. He didn't then. He did later. But yet he's called a mighty warrior. And so, am I willing to follow God's heart and to look at somebody and to see them? Ask God, who do you see them as? Ask them, who do you see yourself as? Tell me about what you have within you. People in any community have within them the assets, the resources, the skills to bring about the community that would be best. Sometimes, though, there are things that get in the way. There are unjust circumstances. There are There's a lot of reasons that can happen, but I think that's where we have to start to shift the narrative, is to shift our thinking to, this is a beloved child of God, filled with potential and dignity and optimism and hope and beauty, and then we go from there.
Yeah, to come alongside them. I am my brother's keeper. And so what does that look like? And so we got to take a commercial break, but when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking with Will Dowell here into this last segment, but we'll also be taking some of your phone calls. So you can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. And for those of you out in Facebook land, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, that live video box, you can leave a comment or question underneath, and we'll try to get to that as well. But when we come back, Will Dowell of Behind Every Door, I'm really interested to hear some of the challenges that he'll be facing in the next 2 to 5 years, but also some of the neat opportunities that have been taking place in the communities that they're serving. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. To those who seek to better the world through the understanding of God's physical laws and innovation of practical solutions. That was the inscription Dr. Mike McCracken wanted on the plaque of the new conference room, paid for by his donations to Purdue University and placed in honor of the people who inspired him the most, his parents. But the university rejected the language. According to their legal analysis, the inclusion of the phrase God's physical laws could be seen as an endorsement of religion, violating the Constitution. There are dozens of plaques throughout the campus. Most identify alumni or donors. In the Student Center, a large display of plaques features the bronze images of past presidents and a quote of theirs. There are quotes from past graduates like Neil Armstrong, and even plaques with quotes from Socrates and Aristotle. So why would the university proudly display plaques featuring quotes from astronauts, ancient philosophers, and even past presidents, but refuse an alumnus wishing to honor his parents with a passing reference to God's laws? Good question. By permitting plaques to display secular quotations but refusing religious references, the university was committing what we call viewpoint discrimination. But after a letter pointing that out and some discussions over the phone, Purdue agreed to redo the plaque to make it clear that the reference to God's physical laws was coming from Dr. McCracken and not the university. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
To all listeners out there, I've been listening for over 2 years. I just recently became a supporter. So I'm a proud supporter of Point of View, and so I would just encourage everyone who listens to this radio station and to your specific broadcast, because it has been so influential for me, and I refer people to it because you put out such great information, and it's so thought-invoking and conversation-stimulating. It's great. So thank you so much, and I'll continue to support you guys.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined in studio by Will Dowell of Behind Every Door. And so we have been talking a little bit about what Behind Every Door does, really impacting local communities in order that they might do it, one, for the glory of God, but also two, for that community to be able to empower individuals and meet those needs so that they might be able to flourish and might be able to experience the fullness of life that God has given to them in his death, burial, and resurrection. So we have been talking with them a little bit. And so, Will, for listeners out there right now that are trying to think to themselves, like, what can I do? Maybe I'm not in the Dallas area. What would you give? What would you say to those individuals that are just trying to figure out, this is great, I've been impacted, I just need to know what's next?
Yeah, to borrow from Mr. Rogers, go be a neighbor.
Yeah.
And go befriend somebody who may challenge your beliefs, and befriend somebody specifically who is in a lower socioeconomic situation. I truly believe that Behind Every Door and other organizations like ours would cease to exist if people in churches, and maybe I mean this offensively, I definitely mean it disruptively, would get out of the pews and go make a friend. Because in those situations, friendship takes over. You love the friend loves you. You listen to your friend. You begin to understand your friend. And I heard somebody say earlier today, empathy and disagreement, can coexist together.
Yeah.
And so I can completely disagree with somebody's actions or beliefs or whatever, but there is a point for empathy. And mind you, they're having the same for me, right? So I think part of that's also that I kind of come down from this position of, moral superiority or authority or whatever you want to call it. And again, just go be a friend, because somebody else has to do the same thing. Yeah,
because I think about it. For example, I've got friends. We'll go to politics for a second. I am in this group message with some old fraternity brothers, and so they are all. We all have different political beliefs, to say the very least. But I would tell you that I disagree with them, but I know them. And if one of them texted and just said, I need somebody here, regardless of their beliefs, I would be there in a second, because I know that person. And even though I might disagree with them over politics, it doesn't matter. And it's not just politics as well. Some of them we disagree about Jesus. We disagree about peanut butter preferences, what have you. Like, there's just a litany of disagreements. But at the end of the day, my heart for them and my friendship with them trumps all those disagreements that we might be able to share. And so really you're calling individuals just to get out and I guess one writer would say to displace yourself largely.
Displacement.
Yeah. Because I've even thought about, you think about it just in our own, and I'm sure you probably can speak to this more, the idea, like, we are just so, and we're so ingrained to where we really don't get outside of our class, don't get outside the socioeconomic circles that we're in, because there's certain gas stations we go to, there's certain grocery stores we go to, there's certain churches that we go to, barbershops that we go to, that largely just keep us within the bubble, right?
That's exactly right. And the truth of it is, we like that. There's a sense of familiarity. It's easy. Ironically, perhaps there might be a little bit laziness on our part in the sense that we just want it to be easy. But it's also inherited, right? Like, I didn't ask for this either. I was just given something. And so I think it's important to keep all those things in mind, that, like, there's a sense of familiarity with others who are different than us, in the sense that we all are operating under similar principles here. And I think the gospel, it does call us to displacement. We just don't go do that. I think displacement is key.
Yeah, or according to the biblical narrative, be incarnation, right? To incarnate ourselves into these areas. And this brings up a kind of a side point that we got from Facebook. JC was writing about the idea of a variety of individuals that are coming together. And so it's not simply just that Behind Every Door is doing something. JC had the question of, do you partner with local public health agencies to provide resources like immunizations to help meet community health needs? And so are you all partnering with other individuals, or you're on your own self-sustaining entity that kind of operates like as a submarine or something like that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We partner. Collaboration is one of our strategic anchors is what we call them. We would not exist without it. And so one of the things I like to say is that we want to be the expert at coordinating experts. We want to make sure everything is addressed, but that doesn't mean that we are addressing everything. And so, yes, we would partner with local churches in some ways. We would partner with local nonprofits to provide different aspects. We would partner with local health agencies. Absolutely. And I think another thing to point out there that's a good, great recognition is as we do this work, we have to listen to the community. Like I can't come in and say, I know what's best for your community. I firmly believe the best way to solve problems is as local as it gets. But I also believe people who are at that local level often have the solutions and the resources already. And so as we enter in to do this work, we want to acknowledge that the community at large and the specific community we're entering into do have resources. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's not go recreate something. So yes, I think that's essential. It's a great point, and it's certainly one that we operate under.
Yeah, because it's almost like you're just trying to find, according to the biblical narrative, you're trying to find that person of peace, right? You're trying to find the man of peace in the community in order that they might be able to help you as you try to partner with them in order to be the hands and feet of Jesus.
That's right.
Yeah, that's so great. Okay, so for our listeners, as we're closing in, give us the last minute remark that you would have. So information where they can find out more about Behind Every Door, or two, what would be the last impact? What would be the last comment that you would have for our listeners?
Man, I'm going to ask the Holy Spirit to give me something. And in the meantime, I would say, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, just at Behind Every Door.
Okay.
Our website is behindeverydoor.org, and they can find us there. And we do look for volunteers, and we partner with Mercy Street to do mentoring, so people could sign up through our website with Mercy Street.
Okay.
And then, a parting, thought. Really, I would say listen to the voice of God as he speaks to you about the people around you. And so maybe don't even think about like, I've got to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Or just listen to the voice of God as to the people that are around you. There are friends to be made everywhere. It doesn't have to be you have to go somewhere. And then in that, I would just add, go to receive. I know you want to give, I want to give too, but we go to receive. You will give. But when we go just to give, we strip someone of their dignity. And we actually don't acknowledge the fact that they have something to offer. So go to receive.
That's really rich. Oh, man, that is really rich. Man. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Will, for joining us, Will Dowell of Behind Every Door. But we've got to take a break. But if you want to find out more information about Behind Every Door, you can also go to our website, pointofview.net. You can find Will's picture as well as his organization's link to find out more information about them. But when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking with Ted Cruz. He's introduced some new legislation relative to school safety, as well as he'll give us an update on the race that he's running, a pretty close race against Beto O'Rourke. And so we'll be talking with him as well as Pete Sessions after him, talking a little bit about tax reform and also his race that he's got going on right now as well. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back, more from Point of View.
It's called normalcy bias, and studies estimate around 70% of people suffer from it even after disaster strikes. Normalcy bias says even though things might look bad, somehow everything will continue as it always has. But in times of great threat, that assumption can be deadly. If freedom is to be preserved, people like you and I have to work just as hard as those who are trying to restrict religious freedom, those who reject the godly wisdom that brought us liberty. Point of View has been a beacon of truth for more than 45 years, but we dare not assume that will always be the case. Be the fire in our beacon today. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Take a few moments right now and visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Be among those who see the threat and take action. Be a beacon of truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programs you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Wednesday, October 10th, 2018 day. So glad that you have decided to join us, or keep on joining us for this second hour. We have been talking a little bit during the first hour when we were in Dallas and then also in Minnesota. We talked a little bit about the surprise resignation, or the intent to resign, by Nikki Haley at the end of the year. We talked a little bit about some of the achievements that she's made, especially with regards to just some of her bipartisan support. She's leaving. She's leaving, according to the latest favorability poll, she has 63% approval rating among individuals. That's a pretty significant margin. And then also, when she was confirmed, if you'll remember, it's kind of a pretty divisive Senate that was confirming some of President Trump's administration, and she received 96 votes in order to be confirmed. And so she largely has bipartisan support, but that's buttressed by the idea that she has just been such a stalwart when it's come to everything from standing up for our alliance with Israel, to standing up to Iran, standing up to Russia when they were continuing to support the Assad regime. She has been a stalwart voice. And so she is announcing her intent to resign, just being mindful of the fact that public service always comes at a cost, not only time-wise, but also financially-wise, and a variety of other issues. And so she will be leaving the administration, leaving her post as the UN ambassador at the end of the year. And so we were talking a little bit about that during the first hour, as well as we were talking about kind of Hurricane Michael. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But during the second hour, we talked with Will Dowell of Behind Every Door. He was just in studio with us, doing some phenomenal work here in Dallas area of really just going into communities, identifying individuals that are just men of peace, is what the biblical narrative would say, but people of peace in the communities, and coming alongside them to help them to be the hands and feet of Jesus, but also just a really challenging word. I mean, I was really struck by it, of not just being there to give, but also being there to receive as well. Because at the end of the day, yes, we're wanting to give because we recognize a God that's going to provide for every need, but he also utilizes individuals and works through individuals in order that we might be able to receive gifts from them as well. And just was a really powerful word that Will gave, but also some great work that they've done. And you can find out more information on Behind Every Door, that organization, at our website, pointofview.net. But we thought we'd also update you on what's happening right now at the Florida Panhandle. Specifically, charged winds upwards of 155 miles an hour have now hit the U.S. mainland at the Florida Panhandle. It's the most powerful hurricane to hit the mainland in 50 years. It blew ashore near Mexico Beach, which is a tourist town about midway along the Panhandle, lightly populated, around 200-mile stretch of white sand beach resorts and fishing towns and military bases. There was actually just a tragic over in Panama City. There was a video that's now since gone viral on Twitter that showed a resort that just kind of crumpled into the ocean. This is just such a significantly strong storm that's now made its way. The mayor, or not the mayor, but rather the governor of Georgia has already ordered the evacuation of 108 counties, or rather has called it a state of emergency, I should say, in 108 counties. And there are a multitude of people now that are making their way out of the area. But also it's keen for us to remember that just because there is an evacuation issued doesn't mean everyone is able to get out. There was a study that was done a few days ago or a study that was done back in 2015 that indicated why certain individuals would not leave. So specifically in 2015, the Pacific Standard magazine conducted a survey of those who were rescued from Hurricane Katrina and asked why they stayed. And 68% said they didn't have the money, 55% didn't have a car, 25% suffered from chronic disease, and 14% are disabled. It's a reminder that evacuations are, to a certain degree, a necessity, but also the reality is that evacuations are a luxury that not all Americans can afford. Consider this statistic that 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency expense. And so think about that for a second. You've got $400 emergency expense. Well, if you think about that, coupled with the idea of an evacuation, so you're asking individuals just to leave their home, leave their kitchens, leave everything that they know in order that they might be able to go to really largely unknown. They're just going out of harm's way. And so think about the costs that could add up with that. So specifically, we said you'll go 600 miles. We'll say you go 400 miles. And so that roughly two tanks of gas. And so then you've got 2 tanks of gas on the way back as well. And that adds up probably roughly to around $140. And then you think about when you get there, you've got a hotel stay. And so we'll say you stay at a hotel for 3 days, and lowballing it, that's around $70 a day, which is just a pretty low number when you consider taxes and everything to stay at a hotel. But then you think about when you get to a hotel, you've also got to eat because now you've left your kitchen. And so we'll say that you're spending $5 a meal for 3 days. That adds up to about $45. So not only do you have $45 for food, you've got $210 for a hotel, and then you've got $140 for gas, and that's not even counting the assorted other expenses that are going to come along the way and sneak up on you. And before you know it, you've got $395 simply just because of an evacuation. Well, if the numbers are correct, that 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency expense, well, an emergency expense might be an evacuation of a natural disaster. And so it's just a keen reminder that the study went on to say that the majority of Americans, when they saw individuals that did not evacuate, there was a level of sympathy for them because of the harm that they're in, but also there was like a degradation, a look of not necessarily disgust, but of displeasure. Why would you not heed the evacuation? Well, it's not as simple as that, I would argue, that individuals are largely constrained by some of these expenses because evacuations are a luxury and not necessarily a necessity. So as Hurricane Michael now has made its way ashore and now barrels through the U.S. with devastating blows, I mean, you even have Governor Rick Scott of California that's likened it to a monster, that many individuals are in harm's way right now. And I just ask that you would join me in praying for God to both protect these individuals, but also to provide for these individuals as well. They might not be able to get out of harm's way, but we also know of a God that will be there with them through it. And so join me in praying for them as well. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to talk more about Nikki Haley and her resignation. Later on this hour, we'll have Representative Pete Sass will be joining us. Representative Sass is in a race right now for Congress against Colin Allred, but he'll be talking a little bit about tax reform. So he'll be talking about the tax reform issue. And then we'll have Senator Ted Cruz that will also be joining us after the break as well. He's introduced some new legislation relative to school safety that I think is going to be very illuminating, especially here in Texas. That will be so very helpful. So we'll talk to him a little bit about the school safety issue as well and some of the work that he's doing with that as well. But we got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll have Ted Cruz as well as Representative Pete Sessions. But if you want to tune in, you can call in rather at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or if you're on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. If you have a question or comment, you can find the live video box and you can leave that question or comment online and we'll get to it eventually over air, or we'll be sure to get back to you via email as well. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, more Point of View right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Last month, I quoted from Victor Davis Hanson's article on the origins of our Second Civil War. One of his explanations focused on our college campuses, and his insightful analysis is worth more than a few sentences I devoted to it a month ago. He argues that higher education helped split the country in two. For example, college campuses competed for scarcer students by styling themselves as Club Med type resorts. This included upscale dorms with phenomenal buffets and lavish gyms. In fact, everything a student might want was right there on the campus. This not only increased the cost of college, but shielded them from the realities of the outside world. They graduated with massive student loan debt and headed out into the world as snowflakes. At the same time, universities were becoming more left-wing. Of course, liberal ideas have always had a home on college campuses, but they weren't just liberal, but leftist. As I've tried to document in previous commentaries, there's a striking difference between the two. A liberal would allow different points of view on campus. A leftist would prevent certain views from being expressed and shout down speakers they did not like and believed were not politically correct. Doesn't that sound like what is happening on campus today? Finally, the curriculum on many colleges became therapeutic. Instead, many courses merely attempted to provide reading and study skills that should have been developed in middle school and high school. Hanson writes that so many students left college mostly ignorant of the skills necessary to read, write, and argue effectively, lacking a general body of shared knowledge. He therefore concludes that a generation ignorant, arrogant, and poor is a prescription for social volatility. This is one major reason why we have so much division in America today. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Hey, this is Noel Boucher with the Ministry of Pure Hope, and I just want to take a minute to encourage you to join the team here at Point of View Radio. Our relationship with Point of View Radio has been a great one over the years, and we're so appreciative of the team here, their hard work, but also their commitment to the truth. And that's what they're doing every day, is speaking truth into lies, into misconceptions, into confusion in our culture. And the ministry is powerful. We have been on the show and been able to see healing over the airwaves as we reach people around the country. And you've probably experienced it if you're listening right now. So I want to encourage you, support Kirby and his leadership, support the whole team here at Point of View Radio, because we are changing the world by speaking truth and pointing people to Jesus, who is the truth.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and we have been talking a little bit about what's happened right now over on the Florida Panhandle right now as Hurricane Michael has now made its way landshore. But nevertheless, we've also are joined over the phone now by Senator Ted Cruz is joining us now over the phone. Ted, how are you? Senator Cruz, how are you today?
Nick, I'm doing great. It's great to be with you, and I will say all of us in Texas and across the country are lifting up the people of Florida in our prayers as they face Hurricane Michael. Obviously, Texas faced our own tragedy with Hurricane Harvey a year ago, and we've seen the devastation that a hurricane of this magnitude can bring. And so we are praying for the safety of the men and women in Florida. We're praying for the safety of the first responders, that people will be spared and kept under God's protection and blessing during this terrible storm.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Well, Senator Cruz, we're so thankful that you decided to make time, because you've got quite a schedule right now. Not only are you running for re-election, but you're also still representing us down here in Texas right now. So I was turned on a little bit to a couple of pieces of legislation that you've offered up, or rather 2 press releases as of the late. And one of those is that you're joining Marco Rubio to introduce the School Security Enhancement Act. Tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Well, that is focused on the need we have to make our schools safer. You know, every one of us has been horrified by the school shootings we've seen in Texas and across the country. Santa Fe High School is just about 45 minutes from my house, and I was at home that morning when that shooting occurred, about 7:30 in the morning, and so I just got in the truck and headed down to Santa Fe. Spent the entire day there with the students and parents and first responders and teachers, and there's something profoundly disturbing that we live in an environment where kids face a very real threat of physical violence and a threat of murder in schools. And so the school safety amendment that I've introduced is legislation that will allow federal funds to go to making our schools safer, to allow federal funds to go to hiring police officers to be physically present on school campuses, armed police officers that can stop a potential assailant, allow the funds to be used to improve physical infrastructure, things like reducing the number of entrances to a school. And you know, most government buildings have 1 or 2 entrances. They don't have 30, 40, 50 like most schools do. Mm-hmm. Shrinking the number of entrances so that any potential assailant comes past law enforcement where you can stop them before they can harm the kids. Doing things like allowing funding for metal detectors where local officials think that's appropriate and needed in the school, and also allowing fundings for things like hardening the doors to the classrooms, so that they're in both Santa Fe and Parkland. The murderers' students tried to brace classroom doors shut from the inside, and the shooter shot through the doors, which were flimsy little doors, and killed students on the other side. We can fix that with doors that are bulletproof and can be locked, which can help make schools safer and make sure we're protecting our kids.
Yeah, I'm looking through this bill right now, and one of the interesting things, especially in light of our previous conversation, it also provides school safety reinforcement, including bullet-resistant doors and those windows that you were talking about. Right. We were just talking with Behind Every Doors President Will Dowell, and talking about in certain segments of Dallas right now, there's just kids that can't learn right now because there's fear that a bullet is going to go through the window, just because the intensity of crime that's happening in their particular areas. And so this legislation seeks to address some of that, it seems like.
Well, and it's common sense legislation. You know, you often see politicians in Washington Democrats who when there's a shooting, the first step they go after is they try to go after the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. And I think that's the wrong approach. That it doesn't work. It's not effective keeping us safe. I think the right answer instead is make our schools safer. I think it's put more armed police officers there, and it's target the bad guys, go after the criminals, go after the felons, go after the fugitives. That's the common sense approach. That's the approach that actually is targeted at fixing the underlying problem.
That's great. That's great. And so not only are you running for re-election, but you're also continuing to represent us here in Texas, not only with this bill of legislation, but also in one of your previous press releases that you've called for the tax cuts to be permanent. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, that's exactly right. As you know, last December, we passed the largest tax cut in a generation. We cut taxes on small businesses and job producers and hardworking families throughout the state of Texas. And the result has been phenomenal. The Texas economy is booming. Mm-hmm. We've seen over 4 million new jobs in the last 2 years. When the tax cut passed, I remember the next weekend, Bernie Sanders went on one of the Sunday shows. And Jake Tapper asked him, said, this tax cut cuts taxes for middle-class taxpayers all across America. Isn't that a good thing? And Sanders responded, of course, it's a great thing. And he said, the problem is, it doesn't make the individual tax cuts permanent. Well, I saw that, and I took that clip. I promptly retweeted it. And I said, Bernie, I agree with you, and I have filed legislation to make the individual tax cuts permanent. I said, Bernie, join me. If the two of us join forces, we could get this passed in a week. Well, unsurprisingly, it was absolute crickets from Bernie Sanders, not a word. And the House just recently took up and voted on legislation very much like the legislation I introduced to make the individual tax cuts permanent. And virtually every House Democrat voted no. My opponent in the Senate race, Congressman Beto O'Rourke, voted no, voted against making the individual tax cuts permanent, because the truth of the matter is Bernie Sanders and Beto O'Rourke and the Washington Democrats, they want higher taxes. They want your taxes to be higher. That's not good for Texas, and that's not what the people of Texas want.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that's important, and I'm sure you can speak to this, it's really is who can spend your money the best.
Yes.
Just really empowering individuals to be able to. So I think about Behind Every Door organization, believing it to be true that individuals that want to help the communities, not necessarily through government support, but also through some of these local intermediary institutions, can help organizations and specifically help communities to be able to flourish.
Well, Nick, that's exactly right. And you know, I'll tell you, the legislative accomplishment that I'm most proud of in my time in the Senate concerns precisely that. And it was part of the tax cuts we passed in December. It included an amendment that I had introduced on school choice. And what it did is it took college 529 savings plans. These are tax advantage plans that you can save, parents and grandparents can save for college expenses. And my amendment expanded that so that you can still use it for college, but now you can use 529s also for K through 12 education. You can use it for public school, for private school, for parochial school, for religious school, your choice, up to $10,000 per child per year. And it ended up passing on the Senate floor 50-50. Actually, Vice President Pence had to come at 1 in the morning and break the tie to pass it into law. And it is the most far-reaching federal school choice legislation that has ever passed. It benefits potentially up to 50 million school kids across this country. And of all of the things I've been blessed to be a part of achieving for the people of Texas, that's the one that for me is the most meaningful.
That's phenomenal. So we've got about a minute and a half left. And so you mentioned your opponent in the race, because not only are you representing us right now, but you're also running again for re-election. And so you're running a pretty tight race right now, according to some observants that are saying that Beto O'Rourke, Congressman O'Rourke, is running quite a race right now. So tell us again, Senator Cruz, why are you running for re-election for another 6 years to represent the people of Texas up in D.C.?
Well, 6 years ago when I was first elected to the Senate, I promised the people of Texas that if elected, I would fight every day for lower taxes, less regulations, more jobs, that I'd fight to secure the border, and I'd fight to defend the Constitution and Bill of Rights. I've kept that promise. I've done that each and every day, and we've seen incredible results. We're seeing it in the economy with tax cuts and repealing job-killing regulations. And I'll tell you, when it comes to the Constitution and Bill of Rights, I'm proud to have helped lead the effort to confirm both Justice Neil Gorsuch and Justice Brett Kavanaugh. My opponent, Beto O'Rourke, was a hard no on Neil Gorsuch and was a hard no on Brett Kavanaugh. And for all of us who care about religious liberty, about free speech, about our fundamental constitutional liberties, it is having principled judges on the bench how we protect those rights, the rights of every Texan and every American.
Well, Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much for taking the time out to be able to talk with us. We're so grateful. And we've got to take a break, but when we come back, more Point of View.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you, 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and we have been talking, just got off the phone with Senator Ted Cruz, who's locked in a battle for re-election right now against Representative O'Rourke in the Texas Senate race. But we're joined by Representative Pete Sessions of the 32nd District here in the Dallas area. Representative Sessions, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you very much for putting us on the show. We have much to talk about, and as you know, this election, we can honestly say will be the most important of our lifetime.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So Representative Sessions, tell me a little bit more about that. Help me understand, why is this election so significant right now? Are you there? All righty. Well, I think we have lost Representative Sessions, so we'll be talking a little bit more. We'll probably try to get him back on the phone. But this is a very interesting race that he faces right now, Representative Sessions. It's been a closely watched race by everyone from the Cook Political Report to various others. One of the interesting things that's happened, there's a number of issues that are being percolated around kind of the world relative to this race. Specifically, there's the tax reform issue that Senator Cruz has put forward. Senator Cruz has put forward the idea and the proposition to be able to make some of those tax cuts permanent, as well as healthcare. Healthcare continues to be that issue that many individuals are debating right now. There was obviously the Obamacare that was put forward, and then there was an attempt to repeal Obamacare. Then there was a skinny repeal of Obamacare, but nevertheless, nothing really went through as well. But also, I think we've got Representative Sessions back on. Congressman, are you there? All right. Well, so not only is there health care reform that's also up in the air, but also immigration. Immigration continues to be that issue. There was a new study that was put out that indicated that the number of illegal immigrants here in the country are pretty significant, are almost doubled, according to a Yale study, more than what we currently, or what we thought held. But Representative Sessions, are you there now? I think we found you.
I am.
Okay, so the question that I asked, you mentioned that this is a significant, this is one of the most important elections that we find ourselves in right now. So help us understand, for the people of the 32nd District of Texas, why is it so important?
Thank you very much. It is for the people really everywhere in Texas, because we have Senator Ted Cruz, who has an opponent that is exactly of the same philosophy in mind that my opponent is. They are called Democrats, and they are attempting to take over the majority. So the issues that are important evolve essentially around three key issues. Number one, both of our opponents, my opponent is absolutely opposed to the tax cuts that we voted on in Washington December 18th, a year ago. He fails to see where the help that has been given not only Texas, but every single American family, the greatest economic boom that we have had, the greatest economy that we have had, the largest number of people working in the history of the country, the stock market that has risen dramatically continues to produce yields for seniors and people who are in the stock market who want to place their money into an instrument, perhaps someday to send their kids to college, perhaps for their retirement. Stable, growing. It's grown enormously during the year. Going to continue that way. The next issue, oh, by the way, Republican form of economics is simple. GDP is higher than unemployment. GDP 4.2%, unemployment 3.9%. They say at 5% it's full employment, but in fact, there still are people that want and need jobs. They are available. The next point would be immigration. My opponent's, Ted's opponent, is in favor of making every single person that's in this country legal. United States citizen. And I am opposed to that. I am for a guest worker plan, a plan that would allow people to do two things, which is to demand on members of Congress. Number one, bring them out of the shadows. Number two, allow them to work. No pathway to citizenship, but a pathway for them to be a guest worker and to have the legal status to have to not only pay their insurance, but produce themselves and live within the laws of this country. They want to make all these people legal citizens, and yet they would be involved in a process that's called Medicare and Social Security, which neither are able to effectively say that they're solvent. And so once again, the Democrats would have us move millions of people into something that would bankrupt the country. Number 3, health care. Our opponents are for what's called single-payer system. Single-payer system is a government-directed where every single employee of a company, a corporation, would lose their employer-provided health care. Some 505,000 people in this 32nd congressional district would lose to a single-payer system. But what's interesting is because Obamacare is so discriminatory and does not work, they now say Medicare for all. And yet Medicare is a senior program. It is not made for families or children or women that are not seniors. It would require a complete makeover that would require years to change, when in fact, as Republicans, we want to use the free enterprise system. We can figure out effectively how to do this. We were one vote off going to conference. We remember Senator McCain went to the Senate floor and put his thumb up, then put his thumb down. We will repass this next Congress, a health care bill that the American people will be very proud of. We have talked about it in detail, and it is the answer. Instead of employees losing their jobs, their health care, and moving down, we want to move people who were down, not receiving fairness, up to an employer-type group plan that would be not only very cost-effective, but it would bring parity in the marketplace. Those 3 issues are the dominant issues that roam the 32nd district.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Representative Sessions. I think one of the interesting things, especially when you think about the 32nd district being here in Texas on a border state, is really that immigration issue. There was a study that was put out by Yale and MIT that indicated that the number of illegal immigrants in the U.S. may be twice as what's expected. I mean, some numbers have it around 11 to 12 million, but their study indicated it could be anywhere from 16 million to 22 million. And so there's just
it would not surprise me.
And so help me understand. Go ahead.
Well, the reason why is because the 13 million is at least 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
That's a figure that was 10 years ago. As you know, even today we're being inundated at our border. And so it goes directly to the point that we've been speaking about a number of years. We as conservatives have to insist that we get to an answer on this issue. And the reason why is because we've got to change the law and the rules that are related to the border and how people are handled at the border. Today, literally, all a person has to say, and they've learned to say they're not from Mexico, they're from South America, Central America. All they have to say is, I want asylum. And they're immediately put in a different line where they are put in a circumstance where they just put their name, explain they want it, and they're given essentially what might be an ankle bracelet and released.
So what would be the solution to that? I mean, I'm thinking about just how big the numbers are, but also to a certain degree, yes. I mean, the studies indicate like when the rule of law is heeded, economic prosperity flourishes and communities flourish, but also to recognize that undocumented immigrants contribute about $11.6 billion to the economy annually.
Well, that is what's called a guest worker plan. A guest worker plan would allow every single person to have to come forward. They would have to present themselves with a surety that they would be given this status unless they had violated the law. Some of the people that have violated the law are people that are in gang members, which we could see from markings that they have on them, would not be extended those privileges. But otherwise, a guest worker status for the vast number of them would allow them to work and to be engaged in work activities, but it would place them into a circumstance where we do not have to take them on as citizens to offer them benefits that we quite honestly cannot pay for.
Well, Congressman Sessions, thank you so much for joining us. We are exceedingly grateful, and we have got to take a commercial break, but when we come back from break, more Point of View.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. To those who seek to better the world through the understanding of God's physical laws and innovation of practical solutions. That was the inscription Dr. Mike McCracken wanted on the plaque of the new conference room, paid for by his donations to Purdue University, and placed in honor of the people who inspired him the most, his parents. But the university rejected the language. According to their legal analysis, the inclusion of the phrase God's physical laws could be seen as an endorsement of religion, violating the Constitution. There are dozens of plaques throughout the campus. Most identify alumni or donors. In the Student Center, a large display of plaques features the bronze images of past presidents and a quote of theirs. There are quotes from past graduates like Neil Armstrong and even plaques with quotes from Socrates and Aristotle. So why would the university proudly display plaques featuring quotes from astronauts, ancient philosophers, and even past presidents, but refuse an alumnus wishing to honor his parents with a passing reference to God's laws? Good question. By permitting plaques to display secular quotations but refusing religious references, the university was committing what we call viewpoint discrimination. But after a letter pointing that out and some discussions over the phone, Purdue agreed to redo the plaque to make it clear that the reference to God's physical laws was coming from Dr. McCracken and not the university. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
Point of View is a part of my daily life, and I know of no other radio program that helps its listeners to develop, articulate, and then defend a biblical worldview as successfully as yours does. For those reasons, I consider it an honor to be able to support Point of View financially, and I would encourage all of your listeners, both young and old, to prayerfully consider doing the same.
I just turned your program on, and I want to just let you know how much I appreciate just getting the truth out.
I really appreciate your program. It's really a blessing to me and to all of us.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Beacon of Truth.
And welcome back to Point of View for this last segment. We are so grateful that Senator Ted Cruz as well as Representative Pete Sessions made time for us. This is, as we know, the election is just around the corner. Registration has now closed for the election. I believe early voting starts in the next week or so. And just I would highly encourage you, regardless of your district that you're in, to exercise your right to vote. One of the things that I'm cognitive of is just the fact that there have been many that have come before me that not only have exercised that right to vote, but also have fought for me in order that I might be able to vote as well. And that's one of the beautiful things about our democratic republic, this experiment that we have, especially as those that are Christians in this environment. One of the ways in which we can love our neighbor is to be able to vote for individuals that one would work to fight and also work to advocate for systems and policies that would be put into place that would cause a tide to swell that would allow communities to flourish. And that could be through a variety of programs as well as a variety of other means. And so I would just highly encourage you to exercise your right when given the chance to vote as well. And so to wrap up the show, there's a couple of articles I'd like to throw your way, and we'll talk about here in a little bit. We talked about this during the first hour. So if you were all the way back in the 12 o'clock hour, so you were tuning in all the way during then, one, you need to get a trophy. And then two, I'd love to share with you some of these. And you can find these on the Point of View website, pointofview.net. And one of those articles indicates that a new study shows that parents get about half an hour of me time every day. So out of the Detroit News, a study they published out of Australia indicated that after analyzing the lives of 2,000 moms and dads, they found the average parent has a little more than a half an hour of free time. But to get there, parents have to go through work as well as some obligations as well. The typical parent said they hide from their children 4 times per week just so they can get a little bit of time to relax. 32% of parents said that are working until at least 8 p.m., long after the children have been put into bed. So the Eagles apparently aren't the only ones living life in the fast lane. On average, parents skip about 227 proper meals every year, according to the research. 88% admitted that busyness keeps them from cooking, and 96% said the lack of time leads them to serve less healthy food. But one of the fascinating things is what's been termed the lawnmower parent now in this current generation. Lawnmower parents, you've heard of the helicopter parent that kind of hovers above their child. But I don't know if you've heard of lawnmower parenting, where instead of hovering above their child, they're mowing their way in front of their child to pave the way in order that they might not be able to encounter any difficulties in front of them. And so what they found is that parents are spending a significantly higher level of time with their children. That number indicates that it's 104 minutes a day for moms and 59 minutes for dads. In his latest book, The Storm-Tossed Family, Russell Moore notes the paradox of modern parenthood. The future children bring is one of joy, but also of sacrifice. Sacrifice, but also joy, Moore writes. Difficulties abound and troubles unimaginable await. Yet according to Moore, the gospel of Jesus changes everything. He says, quote, "The only safe harbor for a storm-tossed family is a nail-scarred home. Yes, difficulties abound, troubles await, but the abundant grace of God is sufficient through it all." But this also brings in another study that I highlighted in the daily briefing today, indicative of the homes that we're actually living in. And what they found is that individuals that have books in the homes have a greater level of a literacy rate and cognitive skills with their children. So according to this study, out of Pacific Standard, it found that people who grew up with books at home tend to have higher reading comprehension and better mathematical and digital communication skills. The magic number appears to be 80 in this. They found that those with around 80 books at home tended to have average scores for literacy, and defined as the ability to read effectively, to participate in society, and achieve personal goals. If you own fewer than 80 books, they found that was a below average literacy. And the literacy rates would only stand to improve 80 and above, but it kind of capped off at 350 books. So Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young insists that their house is a very, very, very nice house, but count me skeptical because of the 2 cats in the yard. I'm a dog man myself, still wondering who let the dogs out. But interestingly enough, over the last 42 years, the average new house has increased in size by 1,000 square feet, according to a study out of the American Enterprise Institute. Unfortunately, more room does not equate to more books. One study found that in middle-income neighborhoods, the ratio is 13 books per child. In low-income neighborhoods, the ratio is 1 book for every 300 children. Relative to library usage, only 48% of kids under the age of 16 have visited a public library in the previous year. It appears as though many haven't gotten over the bump to experience the thrills of reading Goosebumps. I can remember as a kid, my parents, in a shocking twist, I did not like to read, nor did I like to pay attention, nor did I like to heed the rules that were put before me. And so Miss Hall, my kindergarten teacher that I am forever grateful for, decided that she was going to sit down with my parents, and they started instituting some of these rules and traditions. And one of those rules and traditions was the Saturday afternoon library visits. And so every Saturday, my parents would take my brother and I to these libraries, and we would go to the libraries, and we would be forced to pick out books, and then we would have to read these books, and then we would return the books, and so on and so forth. And even though in that time all I would do was read NBA books, so I am the world's leading expert on late 90s, early 2000s NBA basketball, but what it did is it whet my appetite for more reading. And now I'm at a point where I'm just reading all over the place right now. But what David Foster Wallace asserts is what he's finding in today's culture. He says that our entertainment age can put us into a cage. He says it likens us to a cage, and that over time we'll come to enjoy that cage. We'll get lulled into this passivity. And so the reality is entertainment can lull us, but reading can fill us with a type of zeal, according to John Green. In the scriptures, reading emboldens the spirit, convicts the conscience, and encourages the faint-hearted. Joshua 1, that passage that so many of us have stored into our heart, reminds us, sees the correlation between being strong and courageous and meditating upon the word of the Lord. To remind ourselves who God is and what he's done in the past should instill courage and bravery inside of us to know that greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. Not only does it embolden the spirit, but also convicts the conscience. You think about 2 Kings 22 and reading the word of the Lord, and then causing I think it's Hosea to tear his garments because of the sin that he had been committing. And not only does it commit the conscience, not only does it embolden the spirit, but also encourages the faint-hearted, that it prepares us for every good work that Christ Jesus has set out before us before the end of the age. And one of the beautiful things is love turns a house into a home, but books can transform a couch surfer into a change agent. And so we are so thankful that you decided to tune in today to Point of View. Kirby will be back tomorrow. You can find out more information on Point of View at www.pointofview.net. Be sure to check out the Facebook webpage, and we will be back tomorrow.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.